Hello, everyone. We are going to get started today. I'm very excited to have you here for the presentation where we're going to learn about creating visuals for your self-contained classroom. We're going to focus on a few specific types. We'll get into that in a little bit here, but I'm very excited to have you here. So thank you very much for attending, and feel free to put questions in the chat, put any comments or things that you are thinking of as we're going through the presentation, and I will address them as best as possible. So let's get into our presentation for today. So first off, I want to just share a little bit about myself. If you don't know who I am, my name is Jenn Adams. I am a special education teacher, also elementary teacher, and have a few other roles here, as you can see on this slide. So just to give you a little background about me, I started my educational career as an elementary and early childhood teacher in the general education setting. I taught a couple years in first grade, and I taught a few years in pre-kindergarten. Upon doing that in my career, I decided that due to seeing a lot of students in my class that had so many different types of needs, that I just kind of got pulled in the direction of working with students in special education. And so in the time of going back to receive my master's in special education, I worked in an alternative education setting, working with disruptive youth in middle school and high school grades, which is a little bit out of my realm, but I will say it was a very, very positive and experience where I could learn a lot of things. And then the bulk of my teaching career has been spent 10 years in a self-contained autistic support classroom, mostly with middle school grades. So I've worked mostly with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students in a self-contained autistic support classroom. Now, also during those 10 years, I spent some years teaching in brick and mortar, and I also actually and currently also still teach for a public cyber school, which means we're virtual all the time. And so I have done that, and I've also transitioned it's been about a year and a half now that I transitioned into an instructional coach. So now I'm not so much in the classroom working with students. I am actually working with teachers. So I am supporting teachers and teaching them on how to utilize tools, use best instructional practices. And I am currently doing that at the cyber school that I work at, working with teachers in autistic support classrooms, life skill support classrooms, and even emotional support classrooms. So that's keeping me super busy. I also decided during some of that time to go back and receive my administrative certification. Not currently using that certification, but if one day, deciding to become a principal or administrator at a school is a good opportunity for me, I have that option. And then I also decided to receive my Wilson reading certification. So went back and did all the coursework and the internship to receive that as well. And I actually provide some private tutoring in Wilson reading. And then to top that all off, if I'm not busy enough doing all of those things, I am the author and owner of Teach Love Autism, which is a website. You can see it listed there. I have plenty of social media. I'll share all that at the end so you can keep in touch with me. But that has also been kind of where a lot of my supporting teachers and sharing and creating resources has kind of come from. So that is me. Let's learn a little bit about you. So if you're willing, I know we're not always fans of icebreakers, but thought we could get into a little bit of, let me know a little bit about you, something fun. Throw it into the chat. What's your favorite color, your favorite film, your favorite food, favorite city? You do not have to answer all four. Maybe just pick one and answer in the chat. I threw some of my favorites up there on the screen. My favorite food is French fries. I can never turn down French fries. If it's on a menu, I have to get them. So I've probably tried tons of different types of French fries over the course of my lifetime. My favorite color is purple. And my favorite movie of all time is A League of Their Own. I have a soft spot for the sport of baseball and softball, played it for many years, also played in college, and always enjoyed the sport. Awesome. I see some of those answers rolling in. Very nice. Pizza. Pizza's my second. If I couldn't do French fries, I would definitely do pizza. Do them together, even better. I haven't ever seen anybody do French fries on a pizza, so maybe that's a nice idea for somebody to start putting in at a menu. Very cool. All right. So like I said, just wanted to get some fun in there for us before we dove into what we're doing today. So like I said, I'm going to help with showing you some different types of visuals today. We're going to focus on a couple different ones, and then I'm going to show you kind of some quick ways to make them, but also a great resource that you can use if you don't want to take that time to make them as well. Okay, so let's dive in to what are visuals? And I feel like if you work in a special education environment or work with individuals with disabilities, this is a pretty common thing, right? Visuals. They're pictures, could be movies, could be illustrations, something in our world that helps us to understand something, but it's visually based, right? It's a picture, it's a movie, it's, I think of like signs that are around us in our community, right? Stop signs. That's a visual. We use those every day. So it's not just specifically things that we think of maybe in a classroom that we use for visuals. They're all around us everywhere we go. We utilize exit signs and bathroom signs and things like that, which are really easy visuals to kind of just point out that we all use in our everyday lives. But then when we talk about visuals in special education, those are a strategy that we tend to use to help students better understand what is expected of them, whether we're using it to give a direction, we're using it to give an answer cue, we're using it to help those students to quickly understand what's being asked of them, and then also comprehend it as well, because many students we work with tend to struggle with some of that processing, especially auditory processing, which means when we give a direction verbally, I say, please sit in your seat, they might not process that information as easily as we may want them to. And so in situations, it's much easier to hold up a picture of somebody sitting in a chair to let them know that that's the directive that we would like them to do. So very much so in special education do we use these, but honestly, we can use them everywhere. And I am always an advocate for using visuals in any classroom to support any students. So now that we talked about that, let's look at some examples. So I tried to pull from some examples that I've used in either my own classroom or materials that I have been able to access as well. So the picture on the left here that shows the first then board with the stars on it, that is a visual support. So first then boards are visual supports. We're not going to get into those today, but they are pretty much a type of schedule that students can use to understand that first they're going to do one task, then they're going to complete another. And as you can see, there are lots of visuals supporting them to understand what it means to work, or that we're going to use the bathroom. So instead of just having the word bathroom, we have the picture of the toilet there, something common that students would know is in a bathroom. Technology, if you notice on one of those pictures, it's showing a computer and an iPad on there, something our students may recognize much, like very familiar to them, so that then they can say, okay, I'm going to go do what this task is first, and then I'm going to, earn something that I like, which is technology, and I see the picture so I can recognize it very quickly, right? And then the other visual on the other side of the screen is actually just a very basic one that I used in my classroom. What I did is I said to myself, okay, in many of the lessons I'm teaching, there are certain visuals, or I'm sorry, there's certain directions that I'm constantly giving my students. I'm asking them to answer a question. I'm asking them to touch something either on something in front of them at their seats or something on a board. Maybe I'm always asking them to circle an answer, let me know the answer via their device using their version of their natural voice, or I'm asking them to put their pencil down because I need them to pay attention to a direction. So these were a lot of directions I gave in my classroom on a consistent basis. And instead of me constantly saying them, or for my paraprofessionals who were supporting my students in the classroom, maybe in a whole group lesson setting, we would have these boards that were visual and available in the area where we were teaching, that we could just grab one and point to one of those pictures instead of constantly verbally asking our students to do these things. Not only did this help to keep the noise level down, which we know can be very hard for our students when many people are talking at once, but it also really helped to get those students to complete those activities or those tasks without us verbally asking them. And it was easier to fade out those prompts, because asking students to do all of these things are prompts. We're prompting them, touch something, right? They're not doing it independently yet on their own. So using these visuals can help to bring some of that independence in for your students, that you can eventually fade these images out much easier than you can fade out your own voice. So those are some examples. I have a few others here. These are more academic resources in my opinion, but the visuals are really what are being highlighted in these, and these are what are making it easier for the students to access the materials. So things like looking at coins, looking at, some of the rules that may apply to our classroom. We can understand what some of these mean without any words being there, right? And sometimes visuals of things we're going to see in our everyday life, like money, can be really helpful to students to generalize those skills that they're going to need when they're older. Some other examples here, again, this was a bulletin board I had in my classroom with my classroom rules on it, just to help my students understand, again, what the school rules were. These were school-wide rules, so I had to think of a way to get my students to understand, what does it mean to be safe? What does it mean to be respectful? And of course, we would teach lessons at the beginning of the year to help the students understand examples of that and what that behavior should look like. But having these visuals up on our board kind of gave them a reminder if we needed to point over to one and remind the student that that's the way we needed them to be. We already kind of worked on that and used the visuals. And then the picture to the right is actually a schedule. We're going to get into these today, visual schedules. This is a visual schedule that I created for one of the students in my classroom. And it was more of like a mini schedule. So it didn't have everything for the entire day on there, but you can see we have morning meeting, work tasks, which was one of our independent workstations, binder work, which was another independent workstation. Then the student got to take a break, and then they would go to the cafeteria for lunch. So utilizing those visuals was very helpful for the students. These were actual pictures of my classroom and our school, which also helped the student, again, to generalize what was going on. But can you use clip art images? Can you use other graphics to help the students understand it? Absolutely. And then the other visual piece to this that many people may not think about is actually the colors there with the red and the green. So red was symbolizing, we haven't done this yet, hold up, stop. We need to get this done first. And then the green was kind of like, yes, it's finished. And if you notice there are actually flaps on this schedule that close and fasten with the Velcro dot there that the student can close it to symbolize that they have completed the task. So that also provides the student with a visual aspect. And then, like I said earlier, we use visuals every single day in our lives. Just giving you a few examples here. I know when I taught pre-kindergarten, we were constantly doing environmental print, right? Talking about all of those companies and businesses and logos that we see all around us. When you see the Target sign, you know it's those two circles that are red with the white in the middle. That looks like a Target, right? And we know that. We know the arches on a McDonald's very quickly. And that's all visual. We've learned that over time. And then another example too that we use in our everyday lives is a lot of us use maps to get where we're going. That's a visual example of something that's helping us, as opposed to, I think of, I'm going to date myself here, but when I used to need to know how to get somewhere before Google Maps existed, we had a list that was written out and you had to be able to comprehend that information. Now we have apps like Google Maps that looks like what I have on the screen here that allows you to visually look at the map and know where you need to go. So we're going to get into the first type of visual today that I feel really helped a lot of my students succeed in completing tasks in our classroom. I noticed a lot of my students struggled when we gave them just a verbal direction to do something. So for example, the one in this picture here is something that I use to help my students when they came in the morning. So in this instance, I might say to the students, okay, get ready for school to start. Well, what does that actually mean? There's actual steps that we take in our classroom, which of course we had to teach, we had to practice and learn how to do. But my students struggled with that. They didn't realize that when they came into the classroom, they needed to take off their coat. They needed to unpack their backpack and get out maybe a few belongings. They needed to go eat breakfast. We actually did some chores. That's why you see the wipe down table there. And then they got to take a break before our school day started. So this was kind of the arrival process in my classroom for my students. But we took that task of, hey, you're here at school, and we broke it into small actionable steps that the students could then manage, but we could also keep track of. And we used visuals to help us do that. So because we're doing this, this is called a task analysis. So we're taking a task and it's kind of like we're analyzing it and breaking it down into the smaller pieces of what that overall task entails, which for this case, it was the students coming in for the day. What tasks did we expect them to do? And this was all things I expected my students to do. We typically had morning announcements. We would then go into our morning meeting class for the day. And these were the tasks that everybody was expected to do. And so what we did is we put these up on the wall in the classroom. Every student had one, and we put it right above where they needed to hang up their coat and their backpack, which worked very well because we could just guide the students to that area of the classroom. And then they went through these steps. We even had some of our students use a dry erase marker because this was laminated, and we could dry erase check off that they got things done if they needed to do that. And then other students could just look at this list and use it. Now, I will say that there is a big difference here. If we would cover up these pictures, some of our students may only need those words because they can read what it says and utilize it. However, having those pictures there also helps to increase the ability for students to comprehend what we're asking them to do. Okay, so we're trying to build independence for our students with task analysis and helping them kind of see those step-by-step procedures that we need to do. Now, when you're creating a task analysis, the first thing you have to do is you have to identify what is the actual task that you want the students to do. So figuring out, for me, it was in that scenario, I wanted them to do a few things before we got started with our classes for the day in the classroom. It could be a recipe. Task analysis as a recipe is actually a very common functional thing, right? Making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich can be considered a task that we do. And we have steps that we follow, or any recipe, if you think of it that way. So what you then need to do once you figure out what task you want your students to do is think about all of the steps that are included in it. And sometimes I find it's best to actually perform or do this myself, so I can then go through and go, oh yeah, that's right. I didn't say get out the bread. I told them to just start with the peanut butter and the bread and spread it on, but we actually have to go and find that bread first. So going through the process first and writing down all those steps so that you get each piece and you don't miss any is really important, especially because you don't want your students to skip those pieces as well. Think about what order the steps are going to go in, and then also think about the prerequisite skills that your students need. So if my student does not know how to spread peanut butter onto a piece of bread, I can't expect them to do that part of the task unless I've taught them how to do that first. So that's important to keep in mind as well. And then determine how much detail you think your student needs. This is going to be based on the individual. So think of each student and how much help do they need to do each task. So if they don't need to know how to hold a knife in order to spread the peanut butter onto the bread, then you don't need to include that in your task analysis. But if you think that's something they need to know, by all means, add that in there so that you're having those details and making it simple enough for the student to understand. And then, of course, we want to think of, okay, what visuals do I want to add, which is kind of what we're talking about today, right? So after I get those steps written out and I figure out what steps, what images, what symbols, what icons can I add to that to assist the student in getting it done, right? So I want to make sure the visuals are clear. If it talks about spreading peanut butter onto a piece of bread, I should have a picture of bread with a knife spreading the peanut butter, right? I need it to be explicit and relevant to the student so that they can understand exactly what I'm asking them to do. And then, of course, you're going to arrange it into a sequential order and then think about any transitions or any other pieces of the execution that you want them to do. Maybe when I'm done making the sandwich, you want to tell them they can eat it because that's part of the process there. You made that sandwich because you're going to eat it. So that would be one type of visual you could create for your classroom to make it easier for your students to understand how to do a task and also incorporate visuals in it. The next one we're going to talk about today is a visual schedule. So I have an example here. I shared actually one of the examples you can see with the real photos there, but I also have a one next to it with more clip art images. And so it really doesn't matter either way. I do think real photos helps for students to generalize the skills. So if you feel like they don't understand, you have a certain part of the classroom you want them to travel to, but you don't have an actual picture of it, that may be a good thing to start with. And then once they get to know what it is, you can move over to the clip art images that they can use. So just keep in mind, the more you teach how to use it, the easier it's going to be for that student to use. So with visual schedules, we're actually arranging images, symbols, even text to represent different parts of a student's day. So these can be used not just in a classroom, but we tend to see them a lot in special education classrooms to assist students with going to different activities, transitioning, which is moving from one task to another. And why should you use a visual schedule in your classroom? Well, it's going to actually help those students to understand what's coming next. So I can think of many times I've been in a class or in a training, even as an adult, and you want to know how long everything's going to be, right? You want to know how much longer do I need to listen to this person talk? And what are we going to do next? And am I going to have time to go eat my lunch and do those types of things? That's just human nature. So understanding and being able to know what's coming next is something that is very important for our students. And having a schedule is a great way to ease that anxiety for them about what is going to happen in their day, where are they going, and it's even a great way to show when a change is going to happen. So a lot of our students struggle with changes, and when we can give them that predictability of seeing when change is happening, they can better prepare themselves for it, right? I talked earlier about how these can also help you with transitioning, right? Moving from one activity to another. So if I'm looking down that schedule with the clipboard on it, it says breakfast, morning meeting, work tasks. Every time those are changing, we're asking the student to potentially get up from their seat, go to another place, potentially leaving the classroom, depending on what the activity is. And that all involves transitions. And those can be difficult for our students. Ending something, especially if they like to do it, and then starting something new that maybe they're not so much a fan of, can be difficult. But when we know it's coming and it's predictable, it can help with that transition. And again, also promoting that self-regulation, providing the students the ability to see what's coming next so they can feel more comfortable and regulate themselves and prepare themselves for what their day is going to hold. Now, when you're making a visual schedule, one thing you want to do is obviously you have to think, what are all the things I'm going to ask that student to do in that day? So the visual schedules that I showed you in that previous slide, of course, I went through my schedule in my classroom and thought about what things is the student going to be doing that day, so I can make sure I have the proper visuals and text on there for them. So are we going to have a morning meeting? Are we going to have a reading class? Are we going to have a snack time? Are we going to have break time? All of those things are important. I don't recommend skipping things like breaks or things the students enjoy. Make sure you've kind of got a mixture in there of those things. And then think about your schedule format. How are you going to put it together? Do you want it in that long list, kind of like the ones I showed you? Do you want it to go across, right? Or some teachers I've seen put them in pocket charts. I've even seen digital versions of visual schedules where images can be moved around and changed, which can actually be a really beneficial use for those schedules. The biggest thing is, of course, using something that's visually clear and accessible to that specific student. And then next, of course, we want to pick what visuals and icons we're going to use. This is the same as that task analysis. Think about that individual student. What are they going to recognize? What are they going to know this means? And make sure that those icons represent what the task is. So I'm not going to put a picture of kids sitting on the carpet with the teacher reading a story if we're going to lunch, right? Make sure that visual matches the activity that you're doing. Then, of course, when you're making your visual schedule, you want to arrange them in the order they're going to happen. If you think it benefits your students, and I had some students that this benefited, you could put how long each activity is going to be. You could put it as the start time and end time. I found was very effective for my students. You also could just put 30 minutes. We're going to do reading for 30 minutes and put that on there. But I often found my students that wanted the time on their schedule did much better with having it listed as 10:30 to 11 or 1 to 1:30, as opposed to just how long or the duration of the event. And then, of course, put this visual schedule somewhere where your student can access it, somewhere where they can see it, right, from mostly anywhere in the classroom. And if you can even make it portable, meaning it's not stuck to a wall and it's something they can take with them if they need to, that's also an added bonus. And then making sure that it's accessible to them. It's not too high up that they can't reach it. They can actually see it if they come over to it, to help promote the student to be more independent in using that schedule as well. And the third and final example I'm going to give you today is social stories. So social stories are narrative descriptions of different situations, activities, or concepts, but we typically add visuals to them to help our students to comprehend and understand what we want them to learn from them. Now, I think a lot about social stories, typically helping students with managing behavior, managing emotions, understanding what's happening in a scenario. So usually we're explaining something to the student and explaining maybe some of the expectations of what we're looking for in a different scenario with the student. The example here does have how to handle a situation when you're upset. So when you're mad, what does your body look like? What should you do? And there are images here to help support some of that comprehension so that maybe the student can't actually read the words of the social story, but the images with it are relevant enough that can clarify what the expectations are for the student so they know what they should do. So a lot of times we utilize social stories to teach social norms or expectations for behavior within either our classroom or our schools. So when you want to create a social story, there's a couple steps that you're going to want to look at. So the first one is obviously thinking about what social skill or situation do you want to work on with this with the student. So identifying that, and then also thinking about what's relevant to that student's needs or experiences. I'm not going to have a student read a social story about learning how to cross the street if it's not something we're going to practice in school, or I'm not going to teach them about going out and interviewing for a job if they're in kindergarten, right? So think about that relevance of what the student needs in the moment. That's why a lot of times you see social stories based on behaviors, and typically their behaviors, maybe the student is struggling to exhibit appropriate behavior. So we're trying to teach them through the social story what is expected of them. When you write a social story, you actually are going to do a descriptive narrative. What that means is you're going to outline what exactly you want them to do. Kind of like a task analysis, except for it's in more of like a paragraph or story form. You do also want to make sure it's clear and straightforward. I'm not going to dance around the idea that the student should come into the classroom and sit down in their seat quietly. I'm going to say that explicitly so that they know what's expected, using simple language and examples to help them know what it means. Then, of course, it's always going to be better if you have visuals to help support this. So again, we talked earlier about how students may tend to struggle with just listening, right? Listening comprehension skills or auditory skills, where when we read a story to them, they may not comprehend everything that we say. So adding those visuals is going to increase their ability to understand the concepts that we're trying to teach them. And then the other part about a social story that is a little different than maybe those schedules or those task analysis is, again, I said it's in a story format, but it's also meeting that individual student's needs. And we typically add their name in there, right? Or things that they like. So when I'm going over to the carpet and I'm going to go play with my friends, I am going to always say hello to them, and I'm going to then start to play with my favorite toy, which is my cars. So you're going to increase the student engagement by making it about them, right? We always love when the attention is on us and things are about us, and we're going to engage in it more. So there are then the question of, I shared these 3 different types of resources you can use, and then how to add visuals to them to enhance, right, the ability for students to understand them. But how do I actually make these? So you can use programs to create them. I've used, I think, every single one of these to create resources like the ones you saw in these pictures in this entire presentation, including the one that's on the screen here. And I would say for the most part, I've utilized Microsoft PowerPoint, which is an easy way to add text, add boxes, add pictures, things like that, move them around, manipulate them, and make it look the way you would like to. You can, of course, use programs like Google Slides. Canva is another great option, and Adobe Spark. And there are plenty of other programs that you can use. These are just a few that I've used in my career to make different materials. Now, again, there is a faster way. If you are not interested in making these from scratch, right? You can go to other places that have these resources. So one place that I love to be able to grab something when I'm in a pinch, when I don't have all the hours in the day to go get a resource that I need to use for a student, or if a teacher asks me for a quick visual that I don't have the time to make, one place I really like to go to is actually a website called Smarty Symbols. And this website has tons of images. You can actually see here is a resource that I did make for my classroom many years ago, utilizing their symbols to help my students with reading comprehension and also with increasing communication in the classroom. And I use Smarty Symbols. But what I didn't realize was that Smarty Symbols has some of this stuff already made for you in their activity area of their site. So if you're not into making things and you're looking for things, one great thing you can do is you can go in to their website, which is what I'm going to show you now. So I'm going to switch my screen and take you into the Smarty Symbols site. All right, so this is the site here. This is not the page that you'll get to immediately when you go to the site. It will look, it's smartysymbols.com. Let me actually go back just to show you. It will look more like this. And do you need an account? Yes, you do. This is a paid service. I will say, as an educator, it is fairly reasonable for everything that you get in here. But what I wanted to highlight today is when you do log on to the Smarty Symbols site, you can go right to the activity library. This is where the activities are already made for you to be able to use. And they're made by teachers just like us or other education professionals to be able to use. And you can go into this spot. It is called the designer. You can also make your own things in here as well, if that's something of your interest. But you can filter. You can filter by grade levels over here. I can go to the different subject areas here. There's different themes. So if I'm working on dinosaurs or Halloween, I can do that. And then there's also lists of therapy resources that are more specific to certain things, such as behavior or apraxia or visuals, which is what we've been talking about today. So what I did is I actually found a few. I started by going through the subject here, and I actually found, look, visual schedules. Well, we talked about that today. I went in and I was able to find some examples. Social stories was also right here ready for me to go to use. So I was able to click on this and find some as well. And what I did is when you find activities you like here, and these are all made by educational professionals, you can actually click on the little heart and favorite it. So then it gets tucked away back here where it says favorites and save it, which is what I did. And I found a few that I liked that I might want to use later. So for example, this is a visual schedule that somebody made, but I can also use this. They are printable. You can see right here, it says printable, and you can also download it. So once I click on this, open it up, I can download it to my computer because I pay for this service of using the Smarty Symbol site. I can use these resources as well that other people have made and make my life a little easier. So you can see there's ones here. This is that one social story I showed you earlier. Here's another example of a schedule, another social story, a first then schedule, and then I found some task analysis. So this one is what to do on picture day, which, okay, that's a great one to teach students about because it doesn't happen a lot. So we may want to work on this a few days prior to our picture day with the student, but it also helps them to understand what's going to happen, ease some of that anxiety with that new experience. And then tasks like wiping the table, life skills are a great thing to use those task analysis for. And then this one is the opposite of what I showed you earlier in my example, which was an arrival routine. This is a packing up routine. So these are just some of the very few resources that are available on the Smarty Symbols website that are already pre-made that you don't have to go and reinvent the wheel to do. Okay, so just wanted to show you how you can save some time and effort making some of those things. Let me switch my screen back here. All right, and so we are done for today. So I showed you how to make those resources, what those resources are, some of the best practices when you're doing or creating those resources for your students, for your classroom, and utilizing them. So I wanted to share a couple different places if you're also looking for some resources to help you. One place you can go is I have a free resource library on my website, which is teachloveautism.com. You can go right there from my website. I have over 80 free resources, including a lot of schedules and visuals and other supports that you can use. Many of those were in some of the pictures that I shared in our presentation today. One I can think of in particular, that first then board that had the stars in the middle of it. That is a freebie on my website. So if you like that, feel free to go on my site and find that on there. I also on my website have a blog with lots of information about how I've used visuals in my classrooms, examples of ones I've used, and other resources as well if you need any other information working in a self-contained classroom. And then I also have an exclusive freebie for those of you here. I'm going to put the link. I'm hoping it works. If it doesn't, we'll find another way to get it to you guys. I just put a link into the chat that you can click on. It should open up to an Adobe PDF of a resource with some first then boards in it, some schedule boards, things like that, that you can use to edit and create your own for students in your classroom. All right, and then just finally, if you are looking to connect with me further, if you don't want this to be our last time seeing one another, feel free to find me on my website. I do have a store on Teachers Pay Teachers called Teach Love Autism. Feel free to check that out as well. And then I am on many different social media platforms, including Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. I do have a Facebook group called the Teach Love Autism Community. Feel free to join us over there. It's an exclusive group where I share information. I also they're kind of like my little group of friends that we keep in touch with. We ask questions to one another, built a community of working and helping each other, and I will share exclusive freebies and sales over there. So feel free to get in touch with me in any of those places at any time. All right, I'm going to head over to the chat. I think I saw some questions over there. Any specifics on how to create and sell items on TPT? Not at this time. The gist of this presentation was more just how teachers can create resources for their own classrooms, not for how to sell them. Is it permitted to use a template activity made from a peer and tweaking it to sell or not? Again, talking about selling, you know what? I recommend reaching out to me specifically, and I can answer some of those questions for you, just because the basis of our conversation today was more about how to create resources for your classroom. But I appreciate all the questions. I appreciate you being here today. If there's any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or again, reach out to me, okay? All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. It was great meeting with you, and best of luck.